So with the extreme employment situation and the weaknesses in the safety net, it's not surprising that consumer confidence has fallen. The government's National Bureau of Statistics survey for the most recent month, I think that's the March number, found that consumer confidence was back at its July 1998 level. Well, I've argued that the fiscal stimulus program cannot be expected to work as well as the post-Asia crisis stimulus. But it's also important to point out that that stimulus program didn't really work that well either. As you can see from this chart, the pattern of the quarterly GDP growth following the Asia crisis was not a V shape, but a W shape, and this W bottom took 3.5 years to form. In the middle of '98, when the fiscal stimulus measures first began to be announced, there was initially a lot of optimism about the prospects for a V-shaped recovery, much as there is today. But by the end of 1999, with quarterly year-on-year GDP growth making a new low, people began to wonder why the stimulus program had not lived up to the initial expectations. In August of that year, there was an article in the Chinese academic journal Economic Research which suggested two possible reasons why the stimulus wasn't working as well as it had initially been expected. First, the author pointed out that the high marginal savings rate and low marginal propensity to consume of the Chinese consumer meant that the investment multiplier of the stimulus projects had been low. And second, he argued that the type of infrastructure projects that the government had been doing had few linkages to other sectors. I would argue that the current fiscal stimulus program will suffer from these exact same two weaknesses. And I think that this old article actually has a lot to tell us about the situation of the Chinese economy today. So to conclude, I've argued that today's fiscal stimulus is quite similar to that of the post-Asia crisis period, but will not work as well because China's economic structure has changed. And as the outlook for net exports, investment, and consumption is no better than it was 10 years ago, I think a W-shaped bottom is the best that can be hoped for, and that this will be contingent upon a recovery in China's trading partners. As you can see from the last slide, the recovery that eventually happened following the Asia crisis was not a local consumption growth-led recovery, but rather an investment and export-led recovery, which had to wait for the U.S. to emerge from recession in 2002. I think if the world economy is once again to be mired in a Great Depression-like decade of economic stagnation, that an L-shaped bottom for the Chinese economy will be all but unavoidable. So that concludes my presentation. I have some citations for the articles I mentioned if anyone is interested in looking those up. And finally, I'd like to thank the National Economists Club for inviting me to speak today. And I'd like to thank all of you for coming. Thank you very much.